I'm Rebecca Morgan, 28 years old, and on my birthday, my father destroyed me. The expensive restaurant, the forced smiles, the pristine tablecloth stained with wine when he slammed his glass down. I wish you'd never been born, he spat. What a disappointment you turned out to be. My mother's eyes dropped to her plate. My brother Thomas smirked. His wife Allison looked uncomfortable but remained silent. I walked out with tears streaming down my face, knowing this was the last time they'd ever hurt me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Before I dive into my story, where are you watching from today? If you're relating to this already, hit that like button and subscribe to show you're with me. Family trauma is universal, but so is healing. Let's explore this journey together as I reveal what happened when I finally stood up for myself. To understand why my father's words cut so deeply that night, you need to know the history behind them. Growing up as Rebecca Morgan meant living in the shadow of expectations I could never meet. From earliest childhood, my father, Richard Morgan, made it clear that I was secondary to my older brother Thomas. While Thomas received praise for C grades, my straight A's were met with "that's what you're supposed to do." My father, a self-made financial titan, valued only what he understood, and he understood Thomas. Our family home in Connecticut was beautiful from the outside. 5 bedrooms, manicured lawn, the perfect American dream. Inside, it was a battlefield where I fought for scraps of approval. My mother, Diane, once a promising artist, had long surrendered her identity to become the perfect corporate wife. She'd watch silently as my father tore into my choices, my appearance, my dreams. Her silence was its own form of betrayal. "Rebecca, why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my teenage years. When I was 16, I won a national essay competition. My father missed the ceremony for one of Thomas's baseball games, where my brother sat on the bench the entire time. That night, I removed all my academic trophies from the family display case and hid them in my closet. They stayed there until I left for college. At Princeton, I thought distance would heal things. I chose finance, my father's world, hoping finally to speak his language. I graduated summa cum laude, while Thomas barely finished his business degree at a state school. Yet at my graduation dinner, my father toasted Thomas's acceptance into the family business, while mentioning my achievement as an afterthought. I secured a position at Goldman Sachs through my own merits, not my father's connections. When I shared the news, he said, they probably needed to fill their woman quota. 3 years of 70-hour work weeks and 2 major promotions later, he called my success just lucky timing. My romantic life suffered under his scrutiny, too. My ex-fiancé Jason seemed perfect until he started echoing my father's criticisms. I later discovered they'd been having lunches where my father expressed concerns about my stability. Jason broke off our engagement a month before the wedding, citing my unhealthy ambition. Birthday celebrations in the Morgan family were never about celebrating the person. They were performances where my father reigned as both director and critic. My 25th birthday dinner ended with my father questioning my choice to switch firms. My 26th featured a lecture about my biological clock. My 27th, criticism about my condo purchase being financially irresponsible despite my careful planning. This year, I'd secured a major client that would bring millions to my firm. I was in line for a junior partnership, youngest in the firm's history. I foolishly thought this might finally earn his respect. Instead, it triggered the most vicious attack yet. "You think you're special because you shuffle money around?" He'd sneered across the white tablecloth. "Thomas is creating something real, continuing the Morgan legacy while you play pretend with other people's money." The truth was that Thomas had been running our father's company into the ground with risky ventures and poor management. But in my father's eyes, Thomas could do no wrong, while I could do no right. That birthday dinner wasn't an anomaly. It was simply the breaking point after decades of similar moments. That night, as I drove home with mascara streaking down my cheeks, something inside me finally snapped. The need for approval that had driven me for 28 years suddenly evaporated. In its place grew something new, a determination to escape, to disappear so completely they would be forced to confront the reality of my absence. The moment I stepped into my condo that night, the walls seemed to close in around me. Everything in the space represented years of striving for approval that would never come. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Megan. "How was dinner?" I couldn't even type a response before breaking down completely. An hour later, Megan sat beside me on my pristine white couch as I recounted every cruel word. "Beck, you need to cut ties with them," she said, squeezing my hand. "They're poisoning your life." "How?" I whispered. "They're everywhere. Dad's firm competes with mine. Thomas shows up at industry events. Mom calls weekly to remind me of family obligations." After Megan left, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I typed, "How to disappear completely." What started as an emotional impulse evolved into research that lasted until dawn. Forums for abuse survivors, legal advice sites, identity protection blogs. I absorbed everything. By morning, I had a plan. First, I needed legal protection. I contacted Sarah Lambert, a tough attorney I'd met through work, who specialized in high net worth separations. I explained that I needed to disconnect from my family financially while protecting my assets. She listened without judgment. "This won't be simple," she warned during our meeting in her sparse, elegant office. "Your finances are entangled with family investments. Your father will fight this. He won't know until it's done," I replied with newfound determination. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly liquidated my non-essential assets. My condo went on the market through a discreet service that specialized in quick, private sales. I accepted an offer 15% below market value in exchange for speed and confidentiality. My designer furniture, most of my clothes, my father's gift of Morgan family jewelry, all sold or consigned. Sarah helped me establish an LLC in Wyoming, a state known for privacy protections. Through this entity, I purchased a small cabin outside Durango, Colorado, a place I'd visited once on a college ski trip and remembered for its isolation and beauty. Creating a new identity wasn't like in the movies. I didn't need fake passports or to break any laws. I simply needed enough administrative distance to prevent my family from finding me through conventional means. I started by opening new bank accounts under my initials RAM rather than my full name. I obtained a legal DBA, doing business as, certification for Emma Carter Consulting, Emma being my maternal grandmother's name, Carter my mother's maiden name. Resigning from my position was the hardest part. I'd worked tirelessly to reach my level, and walking away felt like surrender. I drafted a resignation email, citing personal reasons. Time to deliver automatically after I was gone. I referred my clients to colleagues who would serve them well. The physical transformation came next. I donated my power suits and designer dresses, keeping only casual clothes without obvious branding. At an upscale salon, 2 towns over from my home, I traded my highlighted blonde hair, styled to match my mother's, for a rich auburn cut into a simple bob. Colored contacts changed my blue eyes to brown. The final stage was the most manipulative, but necessary to buy time. I carefully staged evidence of my emotional distress. A journal left open to entries expressing despair, partially true. Research on remote hiking trails known to be dangerous, completely fabricated. And browser history showing searches about ending pain, misleading, but not explicitly suicidal. I withdrew $5,000 in cash and left my credit cards at home. I donated my cell phone to a women's shelter after wiping it clean. On my last night in New York, Megan came over to help me pack the few remaining items into my nondescript used SUV, purchased with cash from a private seller. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, hugging her fiercely. "You're the only one who knows the truth. Not the story they'll believe, but what really happened. What about when they think you're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Let them worry. Maybe they'll finally understand what they've done. My voice was steady. After a while, I'll send a message letting them know I'm alive. But not where I am. Never that. Megan promised to maintain the fiction that she knew nothing. As my only true friend, she would naturally be the first person my family would question. At dawn, I drove away from my old life, watching the Manhattan skyline recede in my rearview mirror. For the first time in 28 years, I was driving toward something I wanted, not running from something I feared. The weight that had pressed on my chest for as long as I could remember began to lift with each mile marker I passed. 6 months passed like a dream in my small Colorado cabin. Snow melted from the mountains, revealing hiking trails that wound through aspen groves and pine forests. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting meadows I now knew by name. I'd become Emma Carter, a remote financial consultant who kept to herself but smiled warmly when passing neighbors on woodland trails. My cabin was nothing like the luxury condo I'd left behind. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, wooden floors that creaked with character, and a porch that offered breathtaking mountain views. I furnished it simply from local shops and the community trading post. No designer labels, no status symbols, just comfortable pieces chosen for how they made me feel, not how they'd appear to others. Working remotely gave me freedom while my financial expertise provided steady income. I selected clients who needed advisory services but wouldn't recognize my name or background. I specialized in helping small business owners and individuals who'd never crossed paths with Morgan Financial Interests. My new clients appreciated straightforward advice delivered without corporate jargon. The local bookstore became my sanctuary. Its owner, Beth Reynolds, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a quick wit, never pressed when I was quiet, but always welcomed conversation when I sought it. "Emma seems lighter today," she'd observe on good mornings, sliding a cup of tea across the counter. She introduced me to local authors and books about Colorado history, helping me build connection to my new home. "You're a mystery, Emma Carter," she said once, "but everyone deserves their secrets." I monitored news about my disappearance through anonymous browsers and public library computers. The story broke exactly as I'd anticipated. Daughter of financial mogul, missing under troubling circumstances. Photos of me in elegant dresses at charity functions, looking polished but strained, accompanied articles describing my disturbing journal entries and concerning final communications. My father's public appeals came precisely as I'd expected. Richard Morgan, typically private about family matters, suddenly became available for interviews expressing deep concern for his beloved daughter. I watched him on national television, his voice breaking at carefully timed moments, mentioning my struggles with perfectionism and history of emotional fragility, creating a narrative that absolved him of responsibility while painting me as unstable. Thomas stepped easily into his role as the grieving brother. "Becky and I were so close," he told reporters, using a nickname I'd always hated and he'd never used. "She called me about everything." In reality, we hadn't had a real conversation in years. His performance was designed to enhance his own image while subtly reinforcing my father's portrayal of me as mentally unbalanced. My mother's televised appeals seemed genuinely distressed, which surprised me. "Rebecca, darling, please come home," she'd pleaded, mascara imperfectly applied for perhaps the first time in her public life. "Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together." Too late, I thought, watching her hands twist nervously in her lap, a gesture I'd inherited. Meanwhile, Emma was building community connections that Rebecca had never had time for. I volunteered at the local library's literacy program. I joined a hiking group that met Saturdays to explore trails. I attended town meetings and learned the histories and concerns of my neighbors. No one expected anything from me except what I chose to give. The cafe on Main Street became my unofficial office when the cabin walls felt too close. The owner, Natalie Chen, reserved the corner table by the window for me without asking. "The usual, Emma?" she'd call as I entered, already preparing my dark roast with a splash of cream. We developed a friendship based on small kindnesses. I'd help with her accounting questions. She'd slide an experimental pastry onto my table for feedback. You know, Natalie said one afternoon as she wiped down nearby tables, when you first started coming in, I thought you were recovering from something serious. You had that look, like you were holding your breath all the time. Was it that obvious? I asked, surprised by my own candor. Only to someone who's been there, she replied with a knowing smile. But you don't have that look anymore. She was right. The constant tension I'd carried in my shoulders had eased. I'd begun sleeping through the night. I'd developed interests I'd never had time to explore: photography, hiking, even a beginner's pottery class where my imperfect creations were celebrated rather than critiqued. I'd planted a small garden behind my cabin, taking irrational pleasure in nurturing something that existed solely for beauty and sustenance, with no performance metrics attached. For the first time, I lived without an audience. No father assessing my choices against his expectations. No mother subtly noting my appearance. No brother waiting for failures to report. In the absence of their voices, I discovered my own, quieter than I'd expected, stronger than I'd known possible, and increasingly content with the woman I was becoming. The Durango Summer Festival transformed the town square into a vibrant marketplace filled with local artisans, musicians, and food vendors. I wandered through the crowd, anonymous and content in a simple sundress and the wide-brimmed hat that protected my fair skin. At a booth selling handcrafted wooden items, I reached for a small bird sculpture just as another hand touched it. "Sorry," a deep voice said, withdrawing. "Ladies first." I looked up to see a man about my age with tousled dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "It's beautiful," I said, examining the detailed carving. "But I think you saw it first." "I'm Daniel Cooper," he said, extending his hand. "Local high school history teacher and terrible woodworker, which is why I appreciate the real thing." "Emma Carter," I replied, the name feeling natural after nearly a year. "Financial consultant and complete non-artist, which is also why I appreciate the real thing." Something about his unpretentious manner made conversation easy. We ended up sharing a picnic table while eating street tacos, discussing everything from the local music scene to the book I'd just borrowed from Beth's store. Unlike the ambitious men I dated in New York, Daniel asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He wore no designer brands, checked no expensive watch, mentioned no connections to impress me. "So what brought you to Durango?" he asked eventually. "Most people either grew up here or came for the university." I gave my practiced response. Needed a change of pace from city life. Fell in love with the mountains. Daniel nodded. "I get that. I came here to escape too." The word choice made me tense slightly. Escape? His smile turned rueful. Probably too strong a word. Let's say I needed distance from a controlling father with very specific ideas about what makes a successful son. Apparently, teaching history to teenagers doesn't qualify. He shrugged. 6 years later, still haven't regretted it. The parallel to my own situation was startling. I found myself saying, mine wanted me to be exactly like him, just not as successful. Daniel's genuine laugh wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Parent of the Year material, huh? We should start a club. That afternoon stretched into early evening as we discovered shared interests in history podcasts and obscure indie films. When he suggested catching a local band at the brewery the following weekend, I surprised myself by accepting. After he walked me to my car, I sat watching his retreating figure, unsettled by how comfortable I'd felt. Emma Carter was supposed to be self-contained, independent, not forming connections that could complicate my carefully constructed life. Yet I found myself meeting Daniel for that concert, then a hiking expedition to a hidden waterfall he knew, then dinner at his modest craftsman bungalow where he cooked surprisingly excellent Thai curry. Each meeting revealed a man refreshingly different from those in my previous life. Thoughtful, secure in himself without arrogance, passionate about his students without seeking recognition. "What was your family like?" he asked one evening as we sat on his porch swing, watching fireflies emerge at dusk. Complicated, I answered truthfully. We don't speak anymore. Complete estrangement? His tone held no judgment. Yes. The single word contained volumes. Mine somewhere between estrangement and détente, he offered. Christmas cards and birthday calls, but no real connection. Dad's still waiting for me to come to my senses and join his architecture firm. Do you think you ever will? No, Daniel said simply. I found where I belong. His approval would be nice, but it's not worth giving up who I am. The statement hit me with unexpected force. While I'd physically escaped my family, I realized part of me still measured success by whether I'd proven my father wrong, which meant he still defined my goals. As summer turned to fall, our relationship deepened. Daniel showed me the joy of simple pleasures, impromptu picnics by the river, stargazing from the hood of his truck, marathon sessions of board games on rainy days. I introduced him to fine wines and taught him how to make proper risotto. We fit together in ways I hadn't thought possible. Yet a wall remained between us. When he spoke of his childhood or family frustrations, I deflected with vague parallels rather than specific memories. When he mentioned past relationships, I kept mine deliberately generic. Each lie of omission added weight to my conscience. One evening, cuddled on his couch watching a documentary, I nearly told him everything. The words formed in my mind. My name isn't really Emma. I didn't just leave my family. I disappeared completely. They think I might be dead. But fear stopped me. Would he understand, or would he see me as manipulative, unstable, exactly as my father had portrayed me to the world? The risk of losing what we were building felt too great. Then came the newspaper. Daniel had the Sunday edition spread across his kitchen table when I arrived for breakfast. A business section article caught my eye. Morgan Innovations announces expansion despite leadership questions. My father's company, my brother's management issues becoming public. I froze, staring at the familiar logo I hadn't seen in over a year. Emma, you okay? Daniel's voice seemed distant. Fine, I managed, tearing my eyes away. Just. Headache coming on. He looked concerned, but didn't press, just offered ibuprofen and gentle understanding. As he made us omelets, I felt the weight of my secrets threatening the most authentic relationship I'd ever had. Something would have to give, but I wasn't ready yet to risk losing this new life I'd built, this man who saw me clearly without knowing who I really was. 18 months into my new life, winter had settled over Durango, transforming my little corner of Colorado into a snow-covered wonderland. I'd established myself as Emma Carter, financial consultant, girlfriend to beloved history teacher Daniel Cooper, volunteer at the local literacy program, and dependable neighbor. My cabin felt like home, my routines comfortable and sustaining. One evening, while researching investment opportunities for a client, I stumbled across a financial analysis of emerging technology companies. A familiar name caught my eye. Morgan Innovations' new groundbreaking renewable energy storage solution. The technical description triggered a memory so powerful I felt physically ill. This wasn't just similar to the project I'd developed during my senior year at Princeton. It was identical. The theoretical framework, the implementation approach, even some of the terminology was pulled directly from my thesis. Work I'd proudly presented to my father, only to have him dismiss it as idealistic nonsense and economically unfeasible. With shaking hands, I dug through my cloud storage, the only digital link to my past I'd maintained. There it was, buried in encrypted files, my complete thesis and subsequent development work. I'd continued refining the concept during my early years at Goldman, believing in its potential despite my father's scorn. The timestamp on my last update was 3 years ago, approximately 6 months before Thomas had mysteriously shifted Morgan Innovations toward green technology initiatives. My brother had stolen my work. My father had let him, perhaps even encouraged it. The project they'd ridiculed when it came from me had become the centerpiece of the company's future when attributed to the sun. I remembered with painful clarity the dinner where Thomas had first presented his breakthrough concept to the family. Rebecca wouldn't understand the technical aspects, he'd said with false modesty while our father beamed. It's revolutionary. I'd sat silently, confused by the familiar-sounding description but unable to place why, after a 14-hour workday that had left me exhausted. Now I understood. They hadn't just dismissed me, they'd actually taken from me. Driven by a cold fury I hadn't felt since leaving New York, I spent the night digging deeper. Using skills from my finance background, I accessed public company records, shareholder reports, patent applications. Thomas had filed for patents on several key components, all concepts I'd developed. The timeline aligned perfectly. Shortly after I'd shared my complete portfolio with my father, hoping finally to impress him, Thomas had suddenly become the family's technical innovator. Most damning of all, I found email records from a publicly disclosed corporate lawsuit. In one exchange, my father wrote to Thomas, "Use Rebecca's framework but modify the energy conversion section so it's not identical. We don't need her getting ideas if she ever notices similarities." They had knowingly stolen my intellectual property while continuing to belittle my abilities. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult. This wasn't just emotional abuse. It was calculated theft that had built Thomas's entire career. My first instinct was to contact a lawyer, to reclaim what was mine, to expose them publicly. But that would mean revealing myself, abandoning the peace I'd found as Emma. Was vengeance worth sacrificing my new life? After days of internal struggle, I found a different approach. Using an anonymous email account routed through multiple privacy services, I contacted 3 respected financial journalists with a simple message. Investigate the origins of Morgan Innovations' energy storage technology. Compare patent applications with Princeton University thesis archives, 2016 to 2017. Focus on Rebecca Morgan's work. I attached redacted portions of my thesis, enough to raise questions without revealing my identity as the source. Within 2 weeks, the first probing article appeared in the Wall Street Journal. Morgan Innovations Technology, Revolutionary or Recycled? It raised questions about the originality of Thomas's contributions, citing striking similarities to academic work. From the safety of Emma Carter's identity, I watched the story unfold. The initial article led to others. Financial analysts began questioning Morgan Innovations' valuation based on potentially disputed intellectual property. Former university colleagues of mine expressed surprise at the parallels between Thomas Morgan's breakthrough and Rebecca's brilliant thesis work. The company's stock began a steady decline as investors grew nervous about possible patent issues. Thomas made increasingly defensive media appearances, once snapping at a reporter who asked directly about my thesis. My sister was a theory person, not an innovator. I turned concepts into reality. My father issued statements supporting Thomas while dismissing the controversy as competitors attempting to undermine American innovation. But the questions didn't stop. More journalists began investigating the company's history, uncovering other instances where Thomas had taken credit for others' work. I felt vindicated yet strangely hollow as I watched their carefully constructed narrative unravel. The family that had made me feel worthless was being publicly exposed for taking the one thing they'd actually valued about me, my mind. But revenge brought less satisfaction than I'd expected. One night, as Daniel and I watched the national news coverage of Morgan Innovations' continuing leadership crisis, he turned to me with a puzzled expression. "You've been following this story obsessively," he observed quietly. "Every article, every update. But you never mentioned an interest in renewable energy before." I'd been careless in my fixation. "Just find it interesting," I said, trying to sound casual. "Corporate ethics cases are relevant to my financial work." He nodded but didn't seem convinced. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he said into the darkness, "Emma, whatever you're not telling me, whenever you're ready, I'm here." The compassion in his voice nearly broke my resolve. I wanted to tell him everything, about Rebecca, about the theft, about who I really was, but fear still held me back. What if he couldn't forgive the deception? What if he saw me differently? I kissed him instead of answering, postponing a truth I knew would eventually demand to be told. Meanwhile, I continued monitoring the unfolding story of my family's dishonesty from behind the safety of my new identity, unaware that the distance I'd carefully maintained was about to collapse. The Morgan family empire began crumbling faster than anyone anticipated. What had started as questions about one technology patent expanded into scrutiny of the entire company's practices. Business publications ran investigative pieces with damning headlines. Pattern of appropriation at Morgan Innovations and Thomas Morgan. Visionary or fraud? From my cabin in Colorado, I tracked every development. The company stock had plummeted 60% in 3 months. Investors were demanding board changes. Former employees came forward with stories of having their ideas stolen, with several specifically mentioning how concepts presented by Richard's daughter had mysteriously become Thomas's initiatives months later. My father made a disastrous appearance on CNBC, attempting to dismiss the accusations as disgruntled former employees seeking publicity. When pressed about my specific contributions being repurposed, he became visibly agitated. Rebecca was always taking credit for group projects, he claimed, his face reddening. She's been gone for nearly 2 years. Convenient timing for these accusations to surface when she's not here to clarify. The interviewer pushed harder. Multiple sources confirm your daughter presented this exact technology to you before her disappearance. Are you suggesting all these witnesses are lying? My father's composure cracked completely. You don't know anything about my daughter or my family. This interview is over. He removed his microphone and walked off camera while still live on air. The clip went viral within hours. Thomas fared even worse. During a technology conference panel, he attempted to explain the evolution of the energy storage concept. When challenged with specific technical questions about the development process, he stumbled through vague answers before finally snapping, "I don't have to justify my work to people who couldn't possibly understand its complexity." The moderator responded coolly, "Perhaps Rebecca Morgan could explain it, since multiple witnesses say she originally developed the framework." Thomas's face contorted with fury. "My sister was mentally unstable. She's probably dead in a ditch somewhere because she couldn't handle real pressure." The audience gasped. Thomas immediately tried to backpedal, but the damage was done. By evening, "Where is Rebecca Morgan" was trending nationwide. My mother appeared on a morning show, looking years older than when I'd last seen her. "We just want to know she's safe," she said, eyes brimming with tears. "Whatever business disagreements exist, nothing matters more than finding our daughter." For the first time, I wondered if her distress might be genuine rather than performative. Megan called my secure line, the only connection to my past I maintained. "Beck, it's getting crazy," she said, her voice tense. "Reporters are staking out my apartment. Your father sent private investigators to interview everyone you ever knew. They're desperate to find you." "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned about the pressure on my only true friend. "I'm fine, sticking to our story that I know nothing. But Beck, your mom showed up at my door yesterday. Alone. No cameras, no statement prepared. She looked broken." "What did she want?" "Just to know if I'd heard from you, if you were alive. She said she didn't care about the company or the scandal. She just needed to know her daughter was safe." Megan paused. I think she meant it. The news left me unsettled. My mother had always been my father's echo, never showing independent thought or action. This solo mission suggested changes I hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, my relationship with Daniel had deepened despite my secrets. We'd begun discussing moving in together, merging our lives in ways that made my concealed identity increasingly problematic. He noticed my preoccupation with the Morgan saga, but attributed it to professional interest in a major financial scandal. "These people sound awful," he commented one evening as we prepared dinner together, a news segment about my family playing in the background. "Especially the father. Imagine treating your own daughter that way, then stealing her work." Some parents see children as extensions of themselves, not individuals, I replied, the words sticking in my throat. Daniel stopped chopping vegetables to look at me. Your family, the ones you don't speak to, were they like that? The question hung between us. I hesitated too long before answering. Not exactly the same situation. Later that night, Daniel found me sitting on the porch of my cabin, wrapped in a blanket despite the cold, staring at the stars. You know you can tell me anything, right? He said, joining me. Whatever it is you're carrying, Emma, I can handle it. The name, not my name, highlighted the impossibility of continuing this way. I loved this man who had never actually met the real me, yet I feared the truth would end everything we'd built. I'm not who you think I am, I whispered, immediately regretting the melodramatic phrasing. He took my hand. I think you're someone who came here running from something painful. Someone who's built a good life despite that. The details matter less than who you are now. His understanding nearly broke my resolve to maintain my secret. But before I could decide whether to reveal everything, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard Morgan hospitalized following cardiac event. My father had suffered a heart attack after a particularly contentious board meeting where investors had moved to suspend him and Thomas pending investigation. He was in critical condition at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Despite everything, the news hit me hard. The complicated tangle of anger, hurt, and residual love I felt toward my father couldn't be simplified into any single emotion. I excused myself, claiming a work emergency, and spent the night alternating between checking news updates and staring at old family photos I'd kept encrypted on a hidden drive. Daniel grew increasingly concerned about my behavior, but I couldn't explain my distress without revealing everything. The distance between us widened as I withdrew into myself, torn between my new life and the unavoidable pull of my past. I never anticipated how quickly that past would physically crash into my present, destroying the careful boundaries I'd constructed between Rebecca Morgan and Emma Carter. The morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect Colorado winter day that had become a cherished part of my new life. I arrived early at the small office space I rented in town, planning to finish client reports before meeting Daniel for lunch. As I crossed the nearly empty parking lot, a familiar black Mercedes SUV pulled in, parking directly behind my car. My heart stopped when Thomas stepped out, looking simultaneously haggard and enraged. My brother, here in Durango at my workplace. My carefully constructed world collapsed in an instant. Rebecca, he called, striding toward me with the entitled confidence I remembered so well. Or should I say, Emma? Cute reinvention. I fought to keep my composure, glancing around to see if anyone was witnessing this collision of my past and present. The lot remained empty. Small mercy. How did you find me? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Money still opens doors, sis. When Dad's private investigators failed, I hired different ones. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Facial recognition software, financial pattern analysis. Turns out Emma Carter has the exact same investment approach as Rebecca Morgan. Amateur mistake. What do you want, Thomas? I clutched my bag tighter, fighting the urge to run. What do I want? His voice rose sharply. You've destroyed everything. Dad's in the hospital with tubes coming out of everywhere. The company's stock is worthless. The board has suspended us both. And you're playing mountain girl with some high school teacher while our family burns? I didn't do anything except disappear, which is exactly what you all wanted, I countered, finding strength in the truth. Everything else is the consequence of what you and Dad did. We didn't do anything except turn your theoretical nonsense into something practical, Thomas shouted, his face reddening exactly like our fathers did when challenged. You stole my work, I said evenly. I saw the emails, Thomas. Use Rebecca's framework, but modify it so she won't notice? You and Dad didn't just dismiss me. You actively stole from me. He had the grace to look momentarily abashed before rallying. It wouldn't have meant anything coming from you. Dad needed me to present it for anyone to take it seriously. And that justifies theft? Claiming my work as your own? It's not like you were using it. You were busy playing investment banker, chasing validation from strangers instead of building the family business. The absurdity of his logic was almost laughable. I was playing investment banker because Dad made it clear Morgan Innovations had no place for me. Every idea I ever brought was shot down as naive or impractical, until you presented them as your own. Thomas ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it sent an unexpected pang through me. None of that matters now. Dad had a massive heart attack. The doctors aren't sure he'll recover. Despite everything, the news hit hard. I'm sorry to hear that, I said quietly, but I don't see what you expect me to do about it. Come back, Thomas said, his tone suddenly shifting from accusatory to pleading. Make a statement to the press. Say there was a misunderstanding about the technology. Say you were going through personal issues and remember things incorrectly. Say anything to make this go away. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to return from the dead to lie for you? To cover up what you and Dad did to me? Think about Mom, he countered. She's barely functioning. She spends hours staring at your photos, convinced you're dead because of things she didn't say or do. This was manipulation, but it struck a nerve. My mother had been a background figure in my father's emotional warfare. Not the primary aggressor, but a silent enabler. Yet Megan had suggested her grief might be genuine. Mom made her choices, I said, less firmly than before. She stood by while Dad tore me down my entire life. She fought for you more than you know, Thomas said, surprising me. You didn't see the arguments after you'd leave. How she'd confront him about his treatment of you. She never once defended me to my face, I countered, because he threatened to divorce her if she undermined him publicly. She was trying to protect you the only way she knew how. This new information disoriented me. Could my mother have been trapped in her own way? The family dynamics I thought I understood completely suddenly seemed more complex. Even if that's true, it doesn't change what happened or justify what you're asking me to do now, I said. Thomas's expression hardened. If you don't come back and fix this, I'll destroy Emma Carter. One phone call to the local paper revealing your real identity. How do you think your precious Daniel will feel learning everything about you has been a lie? The threat struck deep. Leave him out of this. Come home and I will, Thomas said coldly. You have 48 hours to decide. Help save what's left of this family, or I'll make sure you lose the fake one you've built here. As Thomas turned to leave, I spotted Daniel's truck pulling into the lot. He'd arrived early for our lunch date. My worlds were colliding with catastrophic timing. Daniel parked and approached, eyeing Thomas with confusion. Emma? Everything okay? Before I could answer, Thomas extended his hand with practiced charm. Thomas Morgan. Old friend of Emma's from back east. Just passing through and thought I'd surprise her. Daniel shook his hand reflexively, looking between us with evident confusion. Daniel Cooper. Emma's never mentioned any friends from her previous life. Hasn't she? Thomas replied with mock surprise. We have so much history together. Family history, you might say. Thomas was just leaving, I interjected sharply. Think about what I said, Em. Thomas emphasized the nickname with subtle mockery. 48 hours. He nodded to Daniel. Nice meeting you. I'm sure we'll talk again soon. As Thomas drove away, Daniel turned to me with questions written across his face. What was that about? You look like you've seen a ghost. In many ways, I had. The past I'd fled had found me, forcing a decision I wasn't prepared to make. Did I return to confront my family on my terms? Stay and risk Thomas exposing my identity? Or run again, leaving Daniel and the life I'd built behind? We need to talk, I said finally. Knowing the last fragile wall between Rebecca Morgan and Emma Carter was about to crumble completely. Daniel and I sat facing each other in my cabin, mugs of untouched coffee growing cold between us. Outside, snow began falling in gentle flakes that would normally have enchanted me. Now they just seemed to be closing off another escape route. So, Daniel said, after I'd fallen silent, having explained everything from my real identity to the family dynamics to Thomas's ultimatum. You're Rebecca Morgan, the missing financier daughter of Richard Morgan. Yes, I confirmed, studying his face for signs of anger or betrayal. Everything else I've shared about myself is true. My interests, my values, my feelings, just not my name or background. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, processing. You let your family think you might be dead. I let them think whatever they wanted to think, I corrected gently. I just needed to be free of them. And us? Was I part of your, I don't know, your witness protection fantasy? The question stung because it contained a kernel of truth. No, I said firmly. What happened between us was unexpected and real. That's why this is so hard. I've been terrified of losing you once you knew the truth. He stood up and paced to the window, staring out at the thickening snowfall. I understand needing to escape a toxic family, but this level of deception, Rebecca, Emma, I interrupted reflexively. I'm still Emma to myself. Rebecca feels like someone else now. Someone who was defined entirely by her relationship to the Morgan family. He turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. Do you know who you are when you're not running from something? The question hit deeper than he could have known. I'm learning, I answered honestly. The past 18 months have been the first time in my life I've had the space to figure that out. Daniel returned to the couch, taking my hands in his. I love you, whether you're Emma or Rebecca or someone in between. But relationships need truth to survive. No more secrets, no matter how painful. Relief washed through me. No more secrets, I agreed, tears spilling down my cheeks. So what now? He asked. Thomas gave you 48 hours. What are you going to do? I'd been asking myself the same question since Thomas's departure. I think I need to face them. Not on their terms, but on mine. Not to save the company or protect their reputation, but to finally speak my truth. Daniel nodded. And after? I don't know, I admitted. But I'd like to find out with you if you're willing. His kiss was answer enough. The following morning, I contacted my mother through Megan, arranging to meet at a small hotel in Denver, neutral ground, halfway between my mountains and their world. I would not return to New York, would not step back into spaces where they held power. Daniel drove me to Denver, offering to wait in the hotel lobby. I'll be right here if you need me, he promised as I headed to the meeting room I'd reserved. My mother was already there when I arrived, standing by the window in a simple black dress, her typically perfect hair slightly disheveled. When she turned and saw me, her composed facade crumbled completely. Rebecca, she breathed, moving toward me with uncertain steps. You're alive. You're really alive. I remained near the door, not yet ready for an embrace. Yes, I'm fine, as you can see. Your hair, it's different, she said, reaching out but stopping short of touching me. Everything's different, Mom. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thomas said he found you, living under another name. Emma Carter, I confirmed. That's who I am now. Why? The single word contained decades of confusion and pain. Why did you leave that way? Let us think you might be, she couldn't finish the sentence, because it was the only way to be free, I answered simply. Every other path kept me tied to Dad's expectations and disappointments. He loves you, she insisted weakly. In his way. His way was destroying me, I replied without anger, just stating a fact. And you let it happen, year after year. She sank into a chair, shoulders slumped. I tried to protect you. Thomas mentioned that. Said you argued with Dad privately. I did. More than you know. Her eyes met mine. But I was weak, afraid of losing everything, including you, if I pushed too hard. So instead you watched him tear me down, steal my work, build Thomas up at my expense. I didn't know about the technology, she said sharply, surprising me with her vehemence. When the stories broke about your thesis being used, I confronted Richard. It was the first time in 30 years I threatened divorce. This revelation startled me. You did? She nodded. Too little, too late, I know. But Rebecca, Emma, whatever name you choose, you need to understand something. My silence wasn't approval, It was survival. I made terrible choices trying to navigate between a controlling husband and protecting my children. For the first time, I saw my mother as a complete person with her own struggles and failures, not just an extension of my father. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me understand them. "I'm sorry I wasn't stronger," she continued. "That I didn't find a way to tell you how proud I was of you, how brilliant I always thought you were. Why tell me now?" "Because I thought you were dead," she said simply, "and the possibility that you died thinking no one in your family truly saw or valued you has been unbearable." We talked for hours, truly talked for perhaps the first time. She shared her own journey from promising artist to corporate wife, her slow surrender of identity that paralleled what she'd watched happening to me. I told her about my life in Colorado, about Daniel, about finding purpose and peace away from the Morgan expectations. When the topic turned to my father, her expression grew grave. "He's stabilized, but weak. The doctors say the next few days are critical." "What does he know about me?" "That Thomas found you. Nothing more. I'm not coming back to save the company," I stated firmly, "or to lie about what happened with my work." "I wouldn't ask you to," she surprised me by saying. "Neither would your father, at this point." "Dad would absolutely ask that." "The heart attack changed him," she insisted. "When he thought you might be gone forever, something broke in him." Priorities shifted. I was skeptical but curious. "I'll meet with him, on my terms, in the hospital where he can't control the situation. But I make no promises about what I'll say or do afterward." She nodded, accepting these conditions. "And Thomas?" "Thomas threatened to destroy my new life if I didn't comply with his demands," I said coldly. "Our relationship will require more work." The following day, I entered my father's hospital room alone. The mighty Richard Morgan lay diminished against white sheets, monitors beeping steadily beside him. His always commanding presence had shrunk, his skin papery and pale. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Rebecca," he whispered hoarsely, reaching one hand toward me. I remained at the foot of the bed. "Hello, Dad. You're alive." Tears, something I'd never seen from him, formed in his eyes. "When you disappeared, the journal we found. I wanted you to worry," I admitted, "to feel some fraction of the pain you'd caused me." Instead of the defensive anger I expected, he closed his eyes briefly. "I deserved that." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "You also deserved the company's collapse after what you and Thomas did with my technology." He didn't deny it, I thought. I convinced myself it was better coming from him, that the world would accept it from Thomas, but not from you. "That's not your decision to make with someone else's work," I said evenly. "You stole from me, Dad. After telling me for years I wasn't good enough, you took the one thing that proved I was." "I know," he said simply. "I can't undo it. I can only say I was wrong. About the technology, about you, about so many things." The admission, something I'd never heard from Richard Morgan, left me momentarily speechless. "Building things became more important than building people," he continued quietly. "I measured success in acquisitions, not relationships. I didn't see what that cost until I thought I'd lost you forever." "Pretty words," I said, protecting myself from hope. "But would anything actually change if I came back?" "I don't expect you to come back," he surprised me by saying. "You've built a life on your terms. I'm proud of you for that, even though I had to nearly die to see it." Before I could respond, the door opened and Thomas entered, looking between us with nervous calculation. "Family reunion," he said with forced lightness. "How touching." "Thomas," my father said sharply. "Did you threaten your sister?" Thomas's confident facade faltered. "I was trying to save the company, our legacy." "By bullying the daughter I nearly lost?" My father's voice gained strength. "The same daughter whose work you passed off as your own with my blessing?" Thomas looked stunned by this public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. The medications—" "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," my father interrupted. "Rebecca," he turned back to me, "I don't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I am asking both my children to consider a new way forward. one with truth as its foundation. Thomas looked between us, recognizing the shift in power. What exactly does that mean? It means, I said, finding my voice, that any relationship between us moving forward will be on equal terms. No manipulation, no threats, no stealing. I'll consider limited contact with the family, but I'm not returning to New York or the company. The company needs you, Thomas admitted reluctantly. Your actual name on your actual work might be the only thing that saves it. I'll provide a statement acknowledging my role in developing the technology, I offered. But I won't lie about the theft or pretend it was a misunderstanding. My father nodded weakly. Fair terms. As I prepared to leave, he reached for my hand once more. This time, I let him take it briefly. The name you use now, he asked Emma Carter, is that who you want to be? I considered the question carefully. Emma is who I became when I was free to define myself. So yes, that's who I am now. He nodded, accepting this truth. Then I hope someday to properly meet Emma Carter, on her terms. Walking out of the hospital with Daniel, waiting for me felt like crossing a threshold. The past hadn't been erased or even fully reconciled, but it no longer controlled my future. For the first time, Rebecca Morgan and Emma Carter existed in the same space, not in conflict, but as parts of the whole person I was still becoming. 6 months after the hospital confrontation, autumn painted the Colorado mountains in brilliant gold and crimson. My cabin's porch, now expanded into a proper deck by Daniel's skillful hands, offered the perfect view of this transformation. Like the landscape, my life had undergone its own seasonal change, not returning to what was before, but evolving into something new. True to my word, I provided a statement confirming my role in developing the technology that had become Morgan Innovation's centerpiece. I didn't lie about the theft, but I framed it as a profound misunderstanding about intellectual attribution within a family business context. The careful wording satisfied truth, while allowing a path forward for the company. My father had recovered physically, though he'd stepped down as CEO, taking a chairman position with reduced responsibilities. Our relationship remained cautious, but was slowly building on a foundation of honesty rather than expectation. Our monthly video calls were brief and sometimes awkward, but they happened, a miracle neither of us had anticipated. Emma, he'd say, deliberately using my chosen name, tell me about that community investment project you mentioned. He was learning to listen, to ask, rather than direct. In turn, I was learning to share without fear of judgment or dismissal. My mother had made more dramatic changes. She'd moved out of the Manhattan penthouse into a smaller apartment of her own. Not a complete separation from my father, but a declaration of independence. She'd returned to painting, even selling a few pieces through a local gallery. Her weekly calls became something I looked forward to rather than dreaded. I'm finding my voice again, she told me during a visit to Durango, her eyes brighter than I remembered. I should have done it decades ago, for both our sakes. Thomas and I maintained the greatest distance. The company had survived, but was substantially changed. The board had installed new leadership, leaving Thomas in a diminished role focused specifically on technology implementation, supervised by others. His resentment was evident, but necessity had forced civility between us. We'd had coffee exactly once during his brief visit to Colorado. It was cordial but strained. A relationship that might never fully heal but had at least moved beyond active hostility. You could return as innovation director, he'd offered, unable to resist, suggesting I fix the problems he'd created. The board would approve it instantly. I'm happy with my life here, I'd replied simply. My professional identity had evolved too. Emma Carter Consulting had expanded, hiring 2 local associates. We specialized in ethical investment strategies for sustainable businesses. Work that aligned with my values rather than just my analytical skills. My Princeton thesis technology, now properly credited, had become a personal point of pride rather than a painful reminder of betrayal. The most profound change, however, was personal. Daniel and I had moved in together, blending our lives with a natural ease that still surprised me. My engagement ring, a simple Montana sapphire that reflected the Colorado sky rather than the ostentatious diamond my father would have expected, caught the autumn sunlight as I prepared our deck for a small gathering. "Need any help?" Daniel asked, emerging from the cabin with a tray of glasses. "Just your company," I smiled, no longer feeling the need to handle everything myself. "Megan's flight gets in at 4. She's bringing her new boyfriend. Think he'll survive meeting your best friend and your family on the same weekend?" Daniel teased. "Poor guy doesn't know what he's walking into," I agreed with a laugh. The word family no longer triggered tension. My found family, Daniel, Megan, the friends I'd made in Durango, had expanded to include a cautiously reconstructed relationship with my blood relatives. The boundaries remained clear and firm, but they were boundaries I controlled rather than walls I hid behind. When my parents arrived that evening for their first visit to my Colorado home, I watched with amusement as my father, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him, attempted to make small talk with Daniel about fishing. My mother, meanwhile, had brought paintings inspired by mountain photographs I'd sent her, a visual conversation between our worlds. The dinner wasn't perfect. Old patterns occasionally surfaced. My father's instinct to direct, my mother's tendency to defer, my own habit of emotional withdrawal when feeling challenged. But now we recognize these moments, sometimes even laughing at ourselves as we consciously chose different responses. To new beginnings, my father toasted awkwardly, raising his glass. And to truth, I added, meeting his eyes directly. Later, as Daniel and I stood alone on the deck under the stars after everyone had gone to their separate accommodations, he wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Better than okay," I answered truthfully. "I'm free." "You always were," he said. "You just needed to discover it." Perhaps he was right. The disappearance that had once seemed like running away had actually been the first step toward finding myself. By stepping out of the narrative others had created for me, I'd found the space to write my own story. Not as Rebecca Morgan, disappointing daughter, or even as Emma Carter, reinvented stranger, but as the complex, complete person I was still becoming. The mountains stood solid against the night sky, reminding me that some things remain constant while continuously changing, weathering, evolving, yet fundamentally themselves. Like those mountains, I had found my ground, my place of belonging, not defined by others' expectations but by my own truth. I chose to disappear, so I could finally be seen, not as a reflection of my family's desires, but as my authentic self. In that disappearance, I discovered that the person I was running from needed as much liberation as the person I was running toward. They were two sides of the same coin, now integrated into a whole that was stronger, more compassionate, and finally at peace. How have family expectations shaped your own life choices? Have you ever needed to disappear, literally or figuratively, to find your true self? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about personal transformation and healing. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappear from others' expectations so you can finally appear as yourself.